Hello everyone, this is Genius Yoshi, and today we are talking about Into the Inklands, and we are going to be revisiting some of the top decks or archetypes of the current format and what kind of upgrades are available to these decks from Into the Inklands. And the first deck we'll begin with is Amber Steel Songs, which is one of my personal favorites in terms of competitive value, which aims to be playing some powerful singers like Cinderella and Ariel to start singing spells way earlier than you should, and have access to stuff like Let the Storm Rage On, or the power spells, Grab Your Sword, and A Whole New World. So what type of cards do we have access that can bolster this archetype? Let's begin with this one. Minnie Mouse, Musical Artist. So 1/3. It's a 2-costed character, and she has Singer 3. Also has an effect with bodyguards, but you can mostly disregard that effect. It's decent for a bodyguard deck, but in the style of a songs deck, I really like this card because she's redundant with Cinderella, Ballroom Dancer, Ballroom Sensation. Anyways, you now have access to 1-drop and a 2-drop, both inkables that have Singer 3, so you can reliably cast that Let the Storm Rage On using those 3 singers. The next card I want to talk about for this archetype is Pluto, Friendly Pooch. He's a 0/2 for 1, and he's not inkable, so that means he's a high valued 1-drop. And you can exert him to reduce the cost of your next character by 1. Now that might not go into the songs part of the archetype, but in order to accelerate your characters, Pluto can win you some games, just right off the bat. On turn 1, you go with Pluto, and if the opponent doesn't put any pressure, you're getting a discount. So you're playing a 3-drop on turn 2 on the play, which can be very hard for the opponent to come back from, especially if you can keep Pluto alive for multiple turns. You can snowball the advantage. On the draw, the card isn't quite as good because the opponent's most likely going to be able to answer your Pluto, but it's still a ramp, and you get to use that extra ink whenever you need it. You're going to force the opponent to challenge Pluto. Overall, it's a pretty nice inclusion to a lot of decks that are playing Amber. And if you're trying to accelerate your songs deck, playing a Stitch Rockstar, you can actually double down on the extra card off of the Stitch Rockstar later on in the game, so it's not a dead card. If you're going to be playing Whole New Worlds and just spamming them, then getting that ramping early on is quite a lot of value. So I think at the very least it should be considered as an inclusion in a few copies in the archetype. If we're talking upgrade, let's talk upgrades to our songs. There's the Bare Necessities, a 2-drop song that picks off a non-character card from the opponent's hand, which is a very powerful ability, one of the strongest songs available. And combining that with the other array of super powerful songs that our ink type archetype has, Bare Necessities is a clear inclusion in the deck, especially since it's inkable, so you can just ink it in these bad matchups, and you can decimate your opponent's hand in the good matchups, which I think is going to swing the tide in the matchup versus Ruby Amethyst. So watch out. Ruby Amethyst, you may no longer be the top dog anymore. Continuing on the topic of songs, we're getting the amazing And Then Along Came Zeus, a song that deals 5 damage to a character or a location, flexible and powerful. Now the one downside is that we have a lot of Singer 3s in the deck, so if you are planning on playing And Then Along Came Zeus, then maybe the Singer lineup kind of changes a little bit. You're going to be going after that Singer 4 that we currently have. I think it's Sebastian. And you're probably going to have to make a choice between Let the Storm Rage On and playing 3 singers, or going And Then Along Came Zeus and going after Ariel, Spectacular Singer, and I think Sebastian that has Singer 4, which then allows you to play And Then Along Came Zeus. There's also the concession of not playing too many uninkable cards. And if you're going after the big 5 songs, then you have to be careful about that. But it is a very powerful song, answers almost any character that costs 5 or less in the game right now. So definitely going to see play in some variations of the Amber Steel Songs archetype. Let's move on to the second archetype, Items Tribal. Items was a fun archetype for the first chapter, got a lot of good support, especially with Popsicle in the second chapter, and Hiram Flaversham, which made quite a bit of difference. They're actually splashable in a lot of decks. So what kind of good item support are we getting with Into the Inklands? Well, let's dive right in. The first card that has to be mentioned is Belle's House, Maurice's Workshop. It's a one-costed location, so very cheap. Has 6 toughness, and doesn't gain you any pips of lore, so you really have to pay 2 to move a character to that location to get the benefit that your items cost 1 less. Okay, so it's a small discount on items, but let's take a look back at our list. Well, this costs 0, the Scepter costs 0, the Popsicle costs 0, the Last Resort costs 0, the Magic Golden Flower costs 0, so we're getting a whole bunch of free items, or the other items become quite cheap, but it's really the free that's amazing. That means that you can just cycle them for free with Maurice, and as long as you keep on having these 1, now 0 drop items, you can just keep on drawing cards and getting access to these free items. And that was one of the limiting factors of the combo deck. But now, with Belle's House, Maurice's Workshop, we can enable the combo to go really crazy. And while I don't think that this is necessarily a competitive card, it has the potential to have a game-ending combo and the start of infinite style loops. The second card I want to discuss for Items Tribal is Tinkerbell, the Very Clever Fairy. First of all, it's a nice inkable 5-drop. Okay stats for an inkable 5-drop. With the ability that whenever one of your items is banished, you may put that card into your inkwell face down and exerted. Alright. So it's ramping for throwing away items. Well, Magic Golden Flower and Popsicle, 2 of the very cheap items, Popsicle being amazing, can just sacrifice themselves as long as there's a character in play, and you can, with Tinkerbell, just send them to the ink. So you can play these items, get the triggers, and then drop the Tinkerbell Very Clever Fairy, sacrifice them all, and just turn them into ink, which is a very powerful ability when you think about it. Also, Hiram Flaversham. Play a Hiram Flaversham. Eat an item. The item becomes ink. Ink allows you to combo off a bit better with more items. It allows you to play these bigger threats, more Hiram Flavershams, more shenanigans, which is what Item Tribal is all about. Comboing pieces together, getting ridiculous quantities of ink, and then just spamming stuff until the opponent resigns. So, Very Clever Fairy has me quite intrigued by her cleverness, and I'm looking forward to seeing her in action with some item decks. This brings us to our third archetype, Aggro. Now I'm going to focus a little bit on the Amethyst Aggro, but I'm going to talk a little bit about some other impactful aggro cards that might allow the deck to expand into more colors or more inks. The purpose of the deck is to play just very aggressive threats that will quest for 2 early on, protect them right now with Madam Mins or bodyguards with Simba, and just try to close out the game before the opponent has a chance to do anything. So, we've added a very interesting card with Kida, Protector of Atlantis. It's a 3/5/5, and whenever you play her, all characters get -3 until your next turn. And why that's so good is because it nullifies all the threats that the opponent has on board, unless they have some crazy combat stats. But that's pretty good. I mean, nullifying most, if not all, the threats that they have on board means that the only thing you need to worry about are removal spells or rush characters. So Madam Min's still going to wreak havoc on these decks. And as long as Ruby Amethyst remains one of the top contenders in the metagame, then Kida's not the best card to play. But against large board states, Kida is fantastic. And the deck was a little bit struggling with finding a nice top end to the curve that would have an impact on the board, help with the game plan, while the Protector of Atlantis is the Protector of Aggro, and it is going to do quite a good job helping out the archetype. Next up, the Pride Lands. Now, the Pride Lands is a location for 2, not inkable, quite the downside, but 7 willpower, 1 lore per turn. It's a fairly big threat, and it's a diversified threat. One of the main fallacies of aggro decks is that you go with characters, and if your characters get wiped out and the opponent can control your characters, well, you lose. Well, now you have a diverse threat. The opponent not only needs to deal with all your characters in play, they also need to deal with your location, because Pride Lands over time is going to win you the game. I mean, it's 1 lore, 2 lore, 3 lore, and the opponent has to deal with your Lilos and your Simbas and all of your big threats on the board, and the opponent's laser focused like a Sauron trying to deal with those, and then your Pride Lands just go, yeah, we keep on counting, keep on ticking, and then the opponent has to deal with multiple threats, and that's a pretty good thing. Also, you can send Simba to the Pride Lands, and he's going to get 2+2 willpower, so you can buffer up your bodyguards later in the game when you have ink to spend and fewer cards to play. And you can also get a discount with your king characters or your prince characters. Slight upside there, not the biggest thing. It's really just a clock with upsides later in the game. And particular aggro decks tend to empty their hand, just drop everything on the board. So later, you're going to have the ink to spend to start moving your characters to the Pride Lands and pridefully win the game, or at least that's the plan. Next is the Bare Necessities. I've already mentioned this card as being great in the Amber Songs. It's also fantastic for aggro. I mean, we know the timing of the big removal spells. Grab your sword, be prepared. Well, Bare Necessities allows you to pick them off out of your opponent's hand and protect your large board of characters. So the Bare Necessities allows you also, you can sing it with your bodyguards. So Simba is a great singer for the Bare Necessities, which is really on team. So bonus points for that. And basically picking off the opponent's removal spell can allow your aggro deck to just keep on going through and catch your opponent off guard and take their only answer out of their hands and take the victory into yours. So Bare Necessities, great inclusion there. And also it's inkable, which is what aggro decks are looking for. As other important notes for aggro, Ruby now has access to their 3-quester for 2 in Simba, the Scrabby Cub. He's basically like a Pinocchio in Ruby, but does give you the option of considering that ink for your aggro deck. In the same way, Steel also has access to Kita, Royal Warrior, a 2/3 bodyguard for 2. This is like what Simba is doing in Amber, except you have access to it in Steel, which does allow you to either duplicate the threats or the bodyguards by playing Amber Steel, or try something different as an aggro deck in Steel and make use of the bodyguard. An interesting note and something to keep in mind. The next archetype I want to discuss is Prince John Discard. So it's not an archetype that's been overly popular, but we're getting more and more discard cards, and Prince John allowing you to draw cards every time the opponent discards is a pretty enticing game plan. So what gets added to that disruptive archetype? Well, let's open up with the Bare Necessities. I've talked about it quite a lot in the video, but the opponent has to discard the non-character, which means that this is going to trigger Prince John. So definitely something to keep in mind, and maybe we stop playing Have You Forgotten Me and start playing Bare Necessities as the extra discard spell instead. Speaking of discard, we have Ursula the Deceiver. 1/3 has a similar effect to the Bare Necessities. When you play the character, chosen opponent reveals their hand and discards a song card of your choice. So, not as strong as the Bare Necessities, but you get a character as part of it. It's inkable. You can use the Deceiver to just do some combat, do some questing, and apply some board presence at the same time. Also, this card is an Emerald, which goes with Prince John and doesn't commit you to playing Amber. And as we're getting a few more of these cards in Emerald, our dependency on Amber as the secondary color is starting to diminish, so we might be seeing a bit more variety of discard-based decks. Speaking of which, another great Emerald card for the archetype, Ursula, Deceiver of All, 2/3 for 3, inkable, and whenever she sings a song, you may sing that song again from your discard pile for free, and free feels good. And why am I saying that this is good in discard? Well, it's in the right ink type to begin with, and we've talked about the bare necessities that discards, so that's one use for the Deceiver of All. We also have Sudden Chill, which is a song that allows the opponent, that forces the opponent to discard. So with the Deceiver of All singing Sudden Chill, you can get that same discard 2 effect while having the board presence of Ursula and without committing to Amber, which is a bit of a theme here. Ursula, Deceiver of All, also gets you access to Mother Knows Best as a duplicate, so bounce 2 cards to the opponent's hand so that you can discard them better. Ursula, Deceiver of All is just a very powerful card and has a nice place in the discard archetype. And this brings us to the final archetype I'm going to discuss, Ruby Amethyst, the one you've been waiting for, the deck list that dominates the metagame at the current time. What new toys does it get? Well, the best new toy it gets is the Queen's Castle. It's inkable, it's a 4-drop location, 7 willpower. It is a lot to deal with, and generates 2 ink, 2 lore every turn. This is pretty good, pretty strong, and if you have characters there, then you draw an extra card for every character you have there. That's a lot of card. And Ruby Amethyst loves card advantage, Ruby Amethyst loves pressure, and this card is immune to Be Prepared, so if you wipe out the board, your Queen's Castle is still there. Still there to have some fun, still there to keep on winning the game for you. Great inclusion for Ruby Amethyst. Honestly, a great inclusion in a lot of Amethyst-based decks in general. In terms of characters and top-end characters, there aren't that many great new options that we're getting for Ruby Amethyst. I think my favorite one is Jim Hawking's Space Traveler, because when you can play him, he has decent stats for 5/5 being for a 5-drop, being a 4/4 that quests for 2. And when you play it, you get to play a location for free. So hopefully that location we've just discussed, you played for free, you move Jim Hawkins, and he's ready to draw some cards. And that's really his effect. You get a card for free, so you get to be super cost effective by playing Jim Hawkins that allows you to play your location. You're probably going to have to include a second location in your deck to make it work, but there are other pretty decent options in Ruby Amethyst. And you get to move Jim Hawkins to that location, and then you've just gained a ton of value. And that's what Ruby Amethyst wants. It's inkable, and it gives you another slightly cheaper option for your top end in Ruby Amethyst. In terms of card draw, I think it's worth mentioning Sumerian Talisman, because it's an inkable 3-drop, and whenever one of your characters is banished during your turn, you may draw a card. So as long as you have the Talisman in play, your Madam Fox can come in, trade with an opponent's character, and you get the card back to replace that Madam Fox. Deck also plays Maui, so you get to trade your Maui, get a card back, and this is an inkable card. So maybe a couple of copies to have a flexible access to card draw, but then again, it's competing with Maleficent's Castle and Friends on the Other Side, and might not be good enough to make the cut. And that concludes my review of potential upgrades for 5 different archetypes using Into the Inklands. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below which upgrades that I've missed for any of these archetypes, and what are your thoughts on cards that are going to be included in these archetypes that are going to make a significant difference, or just going to be played as slight upgrades. I'm looking forward to seeing your answers. I hope you've had a great time. Don't forget to like the video, and I'll see you next time.